Tonight is a special night. Please welcome Sinful Horror Stories. This isn't the first time he was on this channel. For anybody that was subscribed to me maybe 4 years ago now, which is quite a bit of time, you would know that we were working together even back then. Anyway, we got something special for you tonight. 3 no-sleep stories. And if you like his narrations, please don't hesitate to go to his channel. Without further hesitation, let's begin. We had to bury my daughter the other day. It's been rough after we lost her a few weeks ago. It was a long battle, but eventually that cancer took her. I wish we never even got our hopes up about it, but what could we have done? The funeral service came and went, and yesterday, me and my husband finally got home. We stayed the previous night in a hotel because the nearest funeral parlor was 6 hours away. 6 goddamn hours to say our final goodbyes to our only daughter. That's sick. My husband Jason had made some plans to go drinking with some of his friends, which I really didn't blame him for. I would have gone with him, but I wasn't in the mood to talk to people right then. So we decided that later that night we would both go out to a nice restaurant and get a basket of my daughter's favorite onion rings in her memory. His friends came and picked him up around 3 in the afternoon, leaving me alone in the house. We had already packed her things and put them in storage, so I didn't really have anything that needed to be done. I resorted to changing into some PJs and taking a nap. I changed and laid down on the couch, seeing that The Price is Right was on. I changed the channel to that so I wouldn't have to fall asleep in silence. For the next hour, I got a few phone calls, some from friends, some from my job. All of them were pretty much the same. We're sorry for your loss. If there's anything we can do, yada, yada, yada. I eventually put my ringer on silent and tried to fall asleep. I must have, because when I felt my phone go off, it was maybe 5:30. The phone said that the person calling was an unknown number, and for a moment I just thought it was a telemarketer. If it was, at least I could vent to them. I picked up the phone and answered the call.
Hello? Hello? Is this Rebecca Jones?
Yes, it is. What you selling? The voice on the other end was gruff and snickered at me.
Rebecca, is your daughter Valentina Jones?
Depends. Who's asking?
The person who has her tied up in his basement.
Was this a sick joke? Was this guy playing with me right now? Are you joking me right now? My voice began to tremble, both with anger and with a sob slowly knotting up in my throat. My daughter is dead, I finally spat out. I sat up on the couch, my blanket falling to the ground. The voice on the other end was muffled for a bit. He was talking to someone.
Rebecca, we have her.
We had to put my daughter in the ground yesterday, you freak. I cut him off. What kind of sick joke was this? I just had to say goodbye to my daughter for the last time, and now I have to deal with this? If this was a joke, it wasn't funny. Everything was quiet. Soon, I heard something on the other end of the line. He was talking to someone. It was her, my baby, Valentina? Well, not her. That wasn't my daughter on the other end of the line. But I felt goosebumps go up my back as I heard that voice. It was her voice. I mean, it wasn't her, but that voice was my daughter's. That was the one thing I will defend, even if I'm telling till I'm blue in the face. Soon, after maybe 2 minutes of silence, the gruff voice finally answered me.
Then who or what do we have?
He asked. I went limp, just laying back down, the phone still to my ear. I heard her voice again. It was closer to the guy this time. I heard him gasp out a few labored breaths before I heard a splat. The line went off after that. I quickly redialed the number, desperate to hear what I knew I heard. I wanted to say just one thing to the thing that had my daughter's voice. To say goodbye, like I never really got to. It rang for a bit before being answered. Valentina? Baby? Is that you? I said, almost pleadingly. I heard some breathing on the end of the line, along with some grunts. I couldn't make out what was said after that, but that voice was definitely her. I never brought up that phone call with my husband, though I know I should have. After that call, I felt oddly at peace.
If you see this fast food chain, don't go through the drive-thru. Dr. Denny's Burgers. I'd never heard of this fast food restaurant before, but it looked open and I really needed a coffee. 1 a.m. starts and road work can be absolutely brutal, and you need something to keep your hands warm. It can be dangerously cold outside. The illuminated menu of the drive-thru became brightly against the rural bushland. These LED beacons seemed very out of place in the middle of nowhere, but I wasn't complaining. A fiberglass mannequin of what I assumed was Denny stood leaning against the restaurant wall. He was a clown dressed in a stereotypical doctor's outfit, complete with a white coat and stethoscope. I'm sure the intention of his placement was to be a fun mascot for the kids. But these fast food figures always gave me quite the opposite feeling. I slowly swerved my ute through the car park and approached the speaker to order. I pushed my window down and the crisp morning air flooded inside. A voice crackled out of the metal box. "Hi, what can I get for you today?" They were either a man or the speaker was busted in a way that dropped their pitch. The voice definitely had a familiar quality to it. I leaned out of the vehicle in a bid to be heard as clearly as possible. "Just a coffee, thanks, mate. Flat white and full cream. Cheers." There was a spell of silence. It was like they were weighing up what I had just said. I wondered if they even did coffee here. They finally responded. "No problem. Drive on through." I released my foot from the brake and slowly rounded the curb to the pavement window. Strangely, I couldn't see any light spilling out from its frame. I stopped and peered inside the building. I couldn't make out a whole lot, but there didn't appear to be any sign of noise or movement from within the kitchen. I reached out and rattled my fist against the glass. Nothing. I presumed they could be short-staffed, and therefore each section might not be in operation. I drove down to the food collection window and was met with a similar scene. It was locked with a staff wanted sign taped to the glass. Nobody was around. It all started to feel a bit eerie and instinctive feelings began to bubble inside. Although the outside of the store was lit up like a Christmas tree, the place was a complete ghost town. I chose not to knock on the glass this time. At this point, I should have just left. I was going to be late for my job and the boss was definitely going to yell at me. He always ran a tight ship and held the expectation that I should always be there before him. However, curiosity tickled my mind. Maybe I had missed something. Backing up the ute, I reversed the way I had just traveled. I slowly rounded the curb and arrived at my previous starting point, the beginning of the drive-thru. The black speaker stood tall amongst the stones and low-maintenance plants that surrounded its base. "Hello, me again," I started. The speaker remained quiet. "Are you guys open, or am I going the wrong way?" I passed the windows and there doesn't seem to be anyone inside. The speaker gave no indication that somebody was listening on the other end. My questions rang out into the night unanswered. I pondered if the late starts were finally getting to me. Had I really begun to hear things when I craved caffeine? I started to wind up my window when the familiar voice chimed. "My apologies, sir. We are extremely understaffed." "Clearly," I replied, pushing my window back down. Makes you wonder, though, doesn't it? The speaker waited a few seconds before answering. "It must make you wonder where my voice is coming from. Somebody had to be messing with me. There must have been a kid or someone who had gotten a hold of the speaker's headset and was operating it from somewhere else." These were all poor attempts to rationalize what was happening. I believed them to be true until the speaker emitted a large exhale. Ha 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 ha! While the noise was unnerving, the visual that followed gave me nightmares for weeks to come. Water vapor, the foggy cloud which follows your breath on cold mornings. It came out of the speaker. It was breathing. I freaked. Adrenaline got the better of me and I threw a punch at the speaker's cover. Tiny plastic fragments shattered everywhere from the point of impact. I had smashed a small hole which revealed a pair of damp vocal cords inside the metal box. The pink and slimy flesh was embedded with various wires. I think they belonged to what was once a human. I shuddered thinking about whose they were. The cords moved and the speaker began to talk once more. "Would you like to join our staff?" Something slammed on the back of my windshield. I jumped. It was thumping on the glass as if the person was trying to get inside. Before I gave myself the chance to look, I released my foot from the brake. The ute began to roll backwards as I had forgotten it was still in reverse. I felt a body move under the wheels. As my ute backed out of the drive-thru, I feared to see the worst. I hoped for an animal or maybe a speed bump, but I was sure the shape had felt human. To my surprise, the Dr. Denny mannequin emerged from beneath. The clown laid sprawled out on a tarmac, still perfectly intact. A crooked smile was sprawled across its face. I wonder how it moved from its former position, but I no longer wanted to wait around for answers. This was my opportunity to leave and never return. By the time I arrived at my work site, I was considerably late. I would definitely cop a spray from the boss, but after everything that had happened, it seemed like the best-case scenario. I remember thinking it would help take my mind off of that horrible experience. As I exited my vehicle, I found him inside his truck leaning over the steering wheel. He looked extremely pale and had his hands tightly wrapped around his neck. I knocked on his window and he turned to me, releasing his grip. Blood pooled out from a slit in his throat. He couldn't utter a single word. That man liked his coffee as much as me. I realized who the vocal cords had belonged to.
I come from a long line of bankers. Every male member of my family for many generations have worked in a bank and have all ended up becoming the bank manager. I was the black sheep of our family and had intended to become a doctor, as I thought it was a more noble cause. When I explained this to my parents, they began to scream at me and tell me that I was a terrible human being. I stood there quietly and listened to their abuse. You honestly would have thought I had told them I intended to rip my clothes off and run through the streets naked by the way they reacted. My extended family organized an intervention, and I was eventually forced to study finance so that I could carry on our family's legacy. I had finished top of my college class, and I had the capabilities to do whatever I wanted. My father pulled a few strings and got me a job at a bank close to where I lived. I hated the job within a few days of working there, as everyone else was older than me by 20 years. They would ignore me the whole time, so I was forced to spend my lunch break by myself. The bank had this huge vault in the basement that was full of money and lockboxes. There was a rule that the money had to be brought down at the end of the day, and because I was the youngest, I would always get stuck doing this. I hated going down there, as it would always give me the creeps. One Thursday, I was given the money to put away and told to lock up afterwards by the manager. He was meant to stay with me during this time, but he was going to see his mistress. I put my earphones in and was singing some songs by Slipknot as I was heading down. There was a lot more money in the vault than usual, as tomorrow was payday for a big company who would like to pay cash. I stupidly sat down on the piles of money and began watching a video that one of my friends had sent. I was lost in a world of my own when I heard the deafening thud behind me. I jumped up and realized that the vault door had closed over. I had completely forgotten that it automatically closes at 6 p.m. There was no way of opening it from the inside, and now there was no signal on my phone due to how thick the walls are. I didn't panic, as I knew someone would be in the bank by 8 a.m., and I could survive until then. It was probably every person's dream to fall asleep on a large pile of money, and tonight I would be doing that. After a few minutes, I started hearing whispers coming from somewhere in the vault. I looked around the whole room, but couldn't find anything. I dismissed it as just my overactive imagination. The whispers began to get more frequent and louder, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. They all seemed to be arguing about something. The room was getting colder as well, and I began to see my own breath. This made no sense, as the vault is temperature controlled to avoid damaging the money. I used a pile of money to cover myself up, to keep myself warm. I was on the brink of falling asleep when these unholy screams emanated from everywhere. There were screams of anguish and pain. My ears began to bleed as the screams felt like they were ripping into my very skull. The screaming finally stopped after almost 20 minutes. I spoke out loud as I feared that I may have gone deaf, but was relieved to hear my own voice. I went to lie back on the money and let out a yelp of pain after getting a paper cut on one of the notes. I began to suck my finger as a way to stop the bleeding. I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye and felt a stinging sensation across my eyeball. I let out a scream of pain and closed my sore eye, and then gazed down to see a blank note lying on the ground with a small trickle of blood on it. The next few moments were chaotic, as suddenly all the blank notes began moving around the room. My entire body felt like it was on fire, as the banknotes began cutting through my clothes and into my exposed flesh. I had my eyelids tightly closed, and the blank notes were determined to rip through my eyelids to get to my eyes. I covered my face with my hands to try to protect them, and instantly regretted it, as paper cuts were now beginning to be concentrated between my fingers. I have no idea how long this onslaught continued, as my next vivid memory is waking up to discover the bank manager standing there with a shocked expression, while another coworker vomited when she saw me. The doctors who treated me were deathly silent, and I found out later that they'd never seen anything like it. My entire body was covered with tens of thousands of small cuts. No one would ever believe me about what happened, and I have refused to this day to ever use cash, ever again. I know that every banknote in that vault was checked, and all of them had traces of my blood. Money has caused a lot of death and misery over the centuries, and maybe it has absorbed some of this. Be careful with your money, as it may try and kill you. Hey, does anybody want some Jack in the Box? Wendy's? What's your preference? Definitely not story 2. Anyway, thank you again, Sinful Horror Stories, for joining us today. You did an amazing job, as usual. And don't forget to check him out if you liked his narration. It seems I'm kind of on a streak right now, and I don't know if I want to ruin it. So tomorrow, I may just release another video. We'll see. Anyways, stay safe out there.